Hello and welcome to part 2 of the series that I'm calling the Biblical Calendar No One Talks About. I hope that you enjoyed part 1 and that this part will make this whole calendar um, idea a little bit more sense. And I hope that it makes more sense as we go along. And again, if you're a skeptic, I hope that you'll give this series a chance. I will do my best to explain something, and I hope that I'm not jumping to conclusions for you. I hope that you can follow it step by step and say, okay, I'm kind of understanding what this guy's trying to say. But the whole point of this is that the Dead Sea Scrolls, dated 300 BC to 100 BC, these caves have preserved artifacts in them, and scrolls in them that say certain things long before Jesus, long before Christian theology in the first and second century or whatever. And so I'm trying to show how these things are very old, but as we move through this series, I hope that you'll see that they become more relevant and specifically for our day today, and that you'll just give it a chance so that all these ideas can come together, and you can say, okay, how did they know all this stuff back then? Because it is a tapestry of information that I've kind of got to go through and try to put it one step at a time. And so I hope that it makes sense, and I'll do my best to explain as clearly as I can. And so we have a template. We have this dial, this calendar system that says, okay, biblically we have 6,000 years of human dominion from Adam and Eve to the second coming, or the what the Christians would call the second coming of Jesus, what Jewish people would call um, the coming of the Messiah. Either way, that it's the same event that we're both envisioning, and then the Messiah will set up a messianic age or a millennial kingdom for 1,000 years. So we have 7,000 of biblical years in total on this calendar from these Dead Sea caves. And so the event I'm trying to figure out is, when is the second coming of Jesus? Obviously, it hasn't happened yet. When is the 6,000 year where he would return and set up his millennial reign for 1,000 years? Okay, so let's put this all together. What are some of these pieces mean? How does this all fit? So Jews and early Christians believe that from Adam and Eve to the year 6,000, that would be humanity's dominion over the earth. And at the 6,000th year, it would be your Jubilee. Messiah would come, Messianic age and kingdom would be set up for 1,000 years. What we need to figure out is three things. When or what year did the first year begin? When does this calendar start? When is the 6,000th year, and is it a Jubilee year? Is the timeline based on a 360-day per calendar year, which is a lunar calendar that the Bible sometimes uses? Is it a 364-day per calendar year, which is what the Zadok calendar is based off of, or is it a 365.2424 days per year, which is our current Gregorian calendar? Seems simple enough, right? that's what I'm saying. Like, I will do my best to try and explain these ideas, make it as clear as I can. Based on Ken Johnson's study of the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, he believes that that Adam and Eve were in the year 3925 BC. That year one, when the 7,000 year calendar begins, in our calendar translated, it would be year 3925 BC. He believes that the Zadok calendar that we're going to go through in this series is a 364-day per year calendar, and that the 6,000th year is 2075 AD, so our future. Mankind's dominion ends, and from 2075 AD to 3075 AD, Jesus returns and sets up his millennial kingdom, or the Messianic age, for 1,000 years. So how does Ken come to this conclusion? In the Dead Sea caves, there are scrolls. and they're, like I said, they're dated from 300 BC to 100 BC. One of those scrolls is called the 11Q Melchizedek scroll, and it's dated about 100 BC. So before Jesus, before the New Testament, all that kind of stuff. The 11 is the 11th cave that they explored. Q is for Qumran. That's the name of the caves. And then Melchizedek scroll is because it mentions Melchizedek. Now, Melchizedek in the Old Testament was a king and a priest. So usually there was a king that ruled the land and a high priest that did the stuff in the temple. But Melchizedek is the priest and king together in one human form, and so that's what is unique. Um, and so the scroll talks about something that God is going to do. It says God guided its interpretation for the final days concerns the captive. So this is an interpretation of whatever the scroll has been talking about. These are the fragments. It's for the final days concerns the captives, who and whose teachers have been hidden and kept secret. So the teachers have hidden and kept secret something about, and it talks about from the inheritance of Melchizedek, and they are the inheritance of Melchizedek, who will make them return. And so this is going to talk about that there have been teachers who have hidden some sort of information about something that the Jewish people are going to inherit. That's an inheritance of Melchizedek, and that they're missing out on this inheritance. And so something is going to happen that is going to, where liberty shall be proclaimed to them to free them, not from financial debts, but all their iniquities. And this will happen. So this event that's going to free everybody, the secret inheritance that has been hidden from them, this event is going to happen. That's going to free them all their debts, not financial debts, but all their iniquities. And this event will happen in the first week of the Jubilee that occurs after the 9 Jubilees, and where the Day of Atonement is the end of the 10th Jubilee. Okay, so now we have this calendar, and we know that this scroll was dated about 100 BC. So if we go here, okay, we've got the first age, first blue, that's the first 2,000 years. And then we get to the second 2,000 years, and the purple, all 4 of them would equal the next. So we would be at 4,000. Well, we know that in the age that they were in the 500-year period of this light purple. And so what it's saying is that after the 9th Jubilee of this 500-year period that they're writing in the 10th Jubilee, in the first week or the first Shemitah, this event is going to happen. So if we take a look and we say, okay, we add up all these years, so we got the first block of this light blue goes from year 100 to 500, then the second block goes from 500 to 1,000, and all 4 blocks of blue equals 2,000. Then we get the first purple is 2,500, then the second is 3,000, third purple, this last third solid purple, that'd be 3,500. Now we're into the fourth, that would bring us to 4,000, but we're not at 4,000 yet because we're only entering the 10th Jubilee. So we haven't completed the 10th Jubilee to complete 4,000 years. So we're at final Jubilee, which is 50 years. So we'd be in the year 3950. You add the first Shemitah, which would be 7 years. So this calendar would tell us that this event happens in 3957 of the calendar. Now, what's fascinating is that the Jewish year rolls over in March 20th. That's or what we'd call the spring equinox. That's when the year would flip over. And so this prophecy talking about the Melchizedek scroll basically happens within a 2-week time frame. See, to get to the 7th year, that would begin March 20th of that year. Well, the event that Christians believe happened was Jesus' death. That's the event that frees the captives from all their iniquities. We read this in Isaiah 53, that he was pierced for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquities, and by his stripes we are healed. And so when we're talking about the time frame that had this event, that had Jesus's death happened 3 weeks earlier, say in the month previous, before the spring equinox, before the new year, it would not have fit in the seventh year. But because the year had already gone into the seventh year on that March 20th, the first light green box here where it says New Year, Jesus died 2 weeks later on the 14th in Passover of that seventh year. And so that's what's fascinating to me about the calendars. It's just such a tight window that it happened, because had Jesus died the next Passover, he would be in the 8th year, right? And so we're basically in a 2-week time frame for the year to click over to the 7th year of the Shemitah, and then he passes away on Passover of that year. So it's very fascinating, just a tight window, being in the 3957th year on this calendar. I hope that makes sense, because that's just such a tight window for this event to happen. Okay, so we have 3957. Jesus dies 2 weeks at Passover later. Had he died in the following year, it would have been the 8th year. It would be 3958, which wouldn't have fit the Melchizedek prophecy. And so if you go and watch my study on the 70 weeks of Daniel that talks about how can we understand the biblical calendar and get to our Gregorian calendar. And so basically what it means, what I show is that the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, found in Nehemiah 2, chapters 1 to 6, history tells us that event, that decree, was in Nisan 445 BC, the 20th year reign of King Artaxerxes, because he reigned from 465 BC to 425 BC. So when Nehemiah 2 says in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year reign of King Artaxerxes, we know that that's going to be 445, because he started his reign in 465 BC, and that's according to Encyclopedia Britannica. So the first event is 445 BC. Now we figure out, and you can see, like I said, in my video on the study of the 70 weeks of Daniel 9, that Messiah, the Prince, suffers the death penalty, and it happens 173,880 days after this decree to rebuild Jerusalem in 445 BC. So that gives us 476 years of Gregorian years, of our calendar years. So 445 BC to 1 BC, that's 444 years out of the 476. 1 AD to Nisan 2232 AD is the remainder, 32.0575 years. So Nisan 1522 of that year is the Passover feast. Jesus didn't die on the 22nd day of Passover, but he fulfilled all that was required between his death on the 15th and the 27th with his resurrection and stuff on that year, within it, like I said, a 2-week time period, based on the Melchizedek scroll. So here we have 3,957th year that this freeing of the captives is going to take place, and that becomes 32 AD. And so we now have a date on this Zadok calendar. I always want to call it Zodiac. Zadok. So if I get it wrong, please forgive me. It is Zadok calendar, Zadok Priest. So we have 3957, which we can now link to 32 AD, both from a biblical and historical standpoint. So it shows that this Melchizedek priest would suffer the death penalty for the iniquities of the world on this Zadok calendar of year 3957 from creation, or 32 AD by our calendar. Adam and Eve lived at year 1, so we just line it up. We go back and we say, okay, if 32 AD is 3957, then year 1 is 3925. It has a total finite date, the calendar, of 7,000, so now we know it's 3075 AD. 3 ages of 2000, as I said, 6,000 years of mankind dominion, and then the Messiah comes for 1,000 years of Messianic age. So that is the end of part 2. I know that might have been a little bit confusing, but I wanted to show how this calendar that counts from year 1 and goes all the way to year 7,000 to figure out which year in our current calendar. Because if we're going to talk about the future, and I'm talking about 2024, well, we need to know what date on the calendar that I'm comparing it to, because that talks about our future. That calendar goes to the year 7,000, goes to 3,075. But even if we're talking about just our timeline before Jesus returns, which would be 2075 AD, well, what happens between 2024 now and 2075 AD? Like, that's what this calendar is claiming to be able to predict, that if we fit what the Bible says about our future into this calendar, does it fit? Does it make sense for what we're seeing around the world? And that's why I hope that as we get into part 3 and part 4, and I think there's even going to be a part 5, that this all starts to make a little bit more sense, that we can tie an artifact from the past that says, here's the biblical calendar. It shows 7,000 years of history, 6,000 being of our history that we're familiar with. The Messiah will come, set up his kingdom for the remainder of 1,000 years, equaling 7,000. But that's our future, right? Before we get to that 6,000th year, which this calendar shows is 2075, we can maybe figure out, well, what does the Bible predict? What did it predict more than 2,000 years ago that this calendar is now laying out for us? And I think that that's fascinating, because you've got this, I just think it's, as we go through this, I hope you find it as fascinating as I do. I hope you're blessed by it. And because I'm just really excited to be able to try and go through it and talk about how this artifact might help us understand what's coming in the days ahead, and lead us to the truth like I said, I believe that Jesus predicted the future, that he is God, that he knew all this stuff was going to happen. Now we have a calendar that we might be able to actually pinpoint some of these things. Fascinating to me. All right, so we'll talk to you soon, and thank you for your time, and Lord bless you and keep you until we talk again.